So this was, as I say, the first commission we had with the BBC, and Imtiaz Darker, who is a very well-known poet, had been commissioned to write a poem about Hull. So we had the good fortune to be able to work with Imtiaz, to be able to go around the city with her, to point out the parts of the city that might be interesting for her to include in the poem. And as she completed it, I was then able to take the most visual parts of the poem and think about the sort of abstract movement we could use. It is a sort of a narrative poem, but actually our work tends not to be narrative. So the piece in the end was fairly conceptual, and it was a matter of trying to simplify down the feelings and the places and the elements of Hull that she was talking about in the poem, and make something that worked as it happened with video. The video was a bit of a, Kirsty's going to talk about the video soon, but it was a bit of a rush job because we hadn't really thought about using video at all. We'd worked with Imtiaz, we'd worked with Joe, who's our musician, who sat in with the dancers and developed the music as we were developing the choreography. But the video really came a bit later with this. And perhaps if you just want to talk about the video bit of it, Kirsty, because you put that together in a particular sort of way.
Yeah, well, I mean, you can see this footage here is the very first time that I met Jackie and JoinedUp. So I came just to basically document the project that you were doing, which was this piece. But I really loved what I saw on that day, and how you were working together with Joe, and all the elements coming together with the poetry. I had all this footage that I've been filming for the festival, and I just thought, well, it could be quite nice to have a background of abstract imagery, to go with the dance. But we didn't really have much time, did we, to get it together? And it was just literally a nice to have. But I just really wanted to get involved with what you were doing. So yeah, we I hate to say the word cobbled together, but it felt a little bit like, just we only had like a day or so to get something together. And I think we've got a clip actually that shows how we used it at the performance, just with a really bog standard projector. We hadn't really got any tech involved. And it there was moments where it worked really well, didn't it, Jackie? But it was very much a kind of the seed of an idea, I would say. I'll just bring up that. So this was actually at the festival. And before I play it, you can see that, it's not the nicest backdrop really, is it, Jackie? But it kind of did the job on the day, but it didn't really do what we do now. You'll see that the video doesn't really hit the dancers very much, which is something we do now. On the floor, there's no projection onto the floor as well. But
So it's fairly obvious there was things wrong with that. The projector didn't actually project over the whole of the back screen, as Kirsty said, which was a bit of a creased sheet, actually, not really a screen. And the floor, we weren't able to project anything very much. But there were actually a couple of moments in that piece. One was where, quite by chance, there happened to be a reflection on the floor, or they'd done something with the lights that reflected on the floor and suggested sort of water. And the other one was when Mark, who was performing there, his T-shirt happened to catch a bit of projection. And they were sort of quite light bulb moments, because we suddenly realised that if we thought about this, the projection could, be a really major part of the whole visual performance. And so that's what led us really to thinking about working with costume. And we were lucky enough the next time, actually, the projector was a much newer projector, and so we were able to cover floor and backdrop. And we were also able to acquire a white dance floor, which made all the difference in the world for that. So we'll see some more clips from some of the other work in a minute or two, but we just wanted to talk about the way these things work together, that in some ways it can be a very organised process, and in other ways it can be a very instinctive process. And actually it's different from one time to another. For instance, with this Tide of Humber, the bit that you've just seen, the music and the choreography were developed together. And then, as we said, the video was sort of cobbled onto it at the end. When we worked with the next one, which was still the Simon Armitage poem, which we're going to go on to in a minute, it was more organised in that the music, I think, came before the choreography, or some bits of it did anyway. And I was able to communicate with Kirsty about the video, although, Kirsty lives over in Liverpool and I live over in Hull. So we didn't get together all that much, but I could suggest to her the sorts of images that we wanted, and she could put things together. And then, when we saw the final thing, then we could make some edits to it. With the most recent piece we've done, Pas de Deux, again, we were sort of constrained by when people were available, because we had more dancers in that particular piece, and sometimes we couldn't do things in sequence. We had to do things as and when people were available. If they wanted to go on holiday, then we had to do something else in between. So it's a really interesting mixture of being very instinctive and creative and spontaneous, and actually being very organised and regulated by circumstance. As far as the poetry goes, I will normally take a poem and look at it and then extract the bits that I think have got the images that will work either with the dance or with the video or with both. Jo is fantastic at being very instinctive about picking up exactly the sort of mood and the style of music that we need. And the other thing with these three pieces of work is that because we see them as a programme, which we hope that we can tour at some point, we needed to have things that were dynamically different and were different in feel, so there was some variety between them. So this Tide of Humber was quite lyrical. Still, which we're going to talk about in a minute, was quite dark in some ways. And then the final piece, the poem by Jackie Kay, was a much more tender and humorous piece. So as a collection, they have some really good contrast there. So just going to have a look at Still, which was the Simon Armitage piece, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. So I'm going to talk over the clip to start with. So we were given the chance to work with Simon Armitage, and he offered us a collection of work that he'd been commissioned to write for the commemoration of World War One, centenary of World War One. But the interesting thing about these particular poems is that the starting point for them was some glass photographic plates that had been taken, aerial photos that had been taken during World War One. And he'd concentrated on the land, on actually what happens to the land in times of war. And that was really, it was a really eye-opening way of looking at war. So we sort of followed up that particular theme of the land. And so Kirsty's going to talk about the video in a minute and how the aerial photos influenced that. And with the choreography with that, again, we looked at the pathways and we looked at the routes that people take, either repetitively over land, or how those are changed through war, for instance. And that formed the basis of some of the choreography. So Kirsty's going to talk a bit more about the video process for this, because it's quite interesting the way she put this together.